Here's what every HVAC company will tell you. If you want colder air, you need a bigger machine. Here's what the numbers actually show. They say cooling starts at the compressor. The data says cooling starts in the soil. They say hot air must be beaten with horsepower. The field studies say otherwise. Natural Resources Canada measured summer air cooling by about 6.8 degrees Celsius before the main system finished the job. That is 12.2 degrees Fahrenheit. They sell tonnage. The Earth gives you temperature stability for free. Most people accept that story. I accepted it for years. I believed the box on the wall was the beginning of comfort. Then I started tracing what farm families used before compressors owned the room. One number would not leave me alone. 9 degrees. Not overnight. Not after a remodel. In 5 minutes. The reason you were never told the real number is simple. The money was never in the ground. The money was in the equipment, the refrigerant, the install, and the service call. The moment you understand that, the whole story changes. Here's what the evidence shows. Here's why nobody making money from summer panic wanted you looking down instead of up. This video is about pulling air through the ground. It can drop delivered temperature by 9 degrees Fahrenheit in minutes. You can do it with parts cheaper than one bad repair visit. And yes, this works even if your house was built 50 years ago. Stay with me, because what I found in Lancaster County uses the same physics the Persians used to make desert air livable 3,300 years ago. The science is brutally plain. A few feet below grade, the Earth stops behaving like the sky above it. Pacific Northwest National Laboratory explains that the ground, even a few feet down, stays cooler than peak summer air during heat waves. Air swings wildly. Soil does not. The deeper mass stores yesterday and ignores this afternoon. That is the entire mechanism. You are not making cold. You are borrowing stability. Natural Resources Canada tested earth tube exchangers in Toronto. The study found summer air cooling of about 6.8 degrees Celsius. It also found winter air warming of as much as 14.3 degrees Celsius. The pipe is just the contact surface. The real machine is the ground itself. Think about your car radiator. It does not create cold. It moves heat somewhere else. An earth tube does the same thing with dirt instead of antifreeze. Push 150 cubic feet per minute through a buried run and drop it by 9 degrees Fahrenheit. You are moving about 1,458 BTUs each hour. Do that with a 38-watt inline fan and your coefficient of performance lands near 10.7. Now compare that with the Department of Energy room air conditioner example that lists a less efficient unit at 10.9 CEER. Convert that rating and you are near 3.2 COP. So you get about 10.7 units of cooling benefit for every 1 unit of electricity here. The window unit gives you about 3.2. That gap is not small. It is the whole business model. And it gets better. The Earth never has to be recharged. It does not leak refrigerant. It does not care about compressor shortages. It does not need a glossy brochure. 9 degrees sounds small until you trace the load. Start at 95 outside, and you are not feeding 95 into the envelope anymore. You are feeding 86. The walls gain less. The return air peaks lower. The thermostat stops fighting the worst hour of the day. If your shaded basement already sits near 72, that cooler intake gives the whole house a head start. This is why old farm buildings feel different. They attack heat early. They do not wait until the room is already loaded, not because it failed, because it was less profitable than a machine with parts, markup, financing, and a replacement cycle. That gap represents a massive market in equipment, service, and contracts every year. And that is why you have never heard of this. I first felt the proof in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, outside Strasburg, in a low stone outbuilding banked into a slope. The lane was white with heat. The fence boards were hot enough to sting my palm. Then I stepped across that threshold and the air changed in one breath. Cool, damp, still. I heard no condenser, no fan motor, no compressor starting and stopping. I only heard water moving through a stone-lined channel and the soft knock of a wooden door settling back in place. Eli stood beside me in the dim light and tapped the wall with his knuckles. He said, "Depth does the work if you let it." Short sentence. Big idea. He told me his family had built with the ground for 4 generations there. The habit, he said, was older than any man alive. The Amish who settled Lancaster in the 1720s carried those habits from the Palatinate, Alsace, and Canton Burn. They did not call it passive cooling. They called it common sense. Nobody told you. Not your builder. Not your contractor. Not the man who sold you the outdoor unit. The Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission records show spring houses in the Lancaster Plain from about 1780 to 1865. They were used for dairying and food preservation. In southeastern Pennsylvania, historian Joan Jensen found this in the 1798 direct tax. About half of Chester County farms had spring houses. Many averaged 125 to 150 square feet. By about 1830, the state record says typical size had doubled. Some had a paved trench about 2 feet wide and 3 inches deep around a raised platform so milk pans stayed cool. A related Pennsylvania German architecture record says some early stone houses were built over springs. Others were banked into hillsides for cool storage below. In other words, the cooling strategy was built into the structure from day one. That knowledge never disappeared. It was filed away. It was waiting. Long before Lancaster, other people had already found the same answer. In Yazd, Persian builders raised wind catchers above desert roofs and pushed air downward through tall shafts. Sometimes that air passed over subterranean water for further cooling. BBC. Future notes that the Dowlatabad Garden wind catcher still rises 33 meters above the ground. Height mattered. So did underground contact. In Korea, the Ondal system sent heat and smoke through angled channels beneath heavy stone floors. Asia society traces that system back to the Bronze Age and later brick and stone forms from roughly 200 BC to 0 BC. That was not decoration. That was thermal storage. Move energy through mass. Hold it. Release it slowly. The Romans reached the same logic with subfloor channels and raised floors in hypocaust systems. Different material, same physics. The Persians used towers, water, and buried flow. The Koreans used stone and flues. The Romans used cavities and masonry. Every civilization that mastered extreme temperature arrived at the same answer independently. The Amish never forgot. They carried it from Canton Burn and the Palatinate to Pennsylvania almost 300 years ago. They kept building it because it worked. They never needed permission to do what made sense. Now comes the part that should make you angry. The origin is easy to name. In 1928, Carrier founded Carrier Lyle to chase the residential market and prepare homes for what it called manufactured weather. The protected products were the home weather maker and then the room weather maker. A house that cooled itself with shade, masonry, water, and buried pipe threatened a dealer economy. Carrier's own history says dealers bought $500,000 of product in 1933 and $57 million by 1958. The mechanism was quieter than a ban. It worked through language, standards, and aspiration. In 1973, ASHRAE approved Standard 62, titled Standards for Mechanical and Natural Ventilation. From there, ventilation became a table, a rate, a compliance path, and eventually a code habit. NIST's history of that standard says later addenda clarified design requirements for natural ventilation and removed language inconsistent with code application. Once a solution fits a table, an inspector sees it. Once it fits a box, a contractor sells it. The named allies were visible in daylight. Life magazine ran a 1945 spread telling Americans that after the war, air conditioning would be cheap enough for private homes. Smithsonian's History of Cooling shows movie theaters had already introduced the public to cooled air as a luxury experience long before that. Congress installed carrier cooling in the House in 1928 and in the Senate in 1929. Carriers sold the equipment, the press sold the dream. Code bodies sold the language that made mechanical systems easier to specify than built-in thermal behavior. That is why the silence matters. Mechanical cooling announces itself each time it starts. Vernacular cooling hides in masonry, shade, water, and depth. It lowers the baseline before you even notice it. Then a small fan, or a smaller machine, finishes the job. Once you see that order, modern building starts to look backward. We call the older methods primitive because they lack branding, but they solve the first half of the problem with almost no moving parts. Then the schools followed. Builders copied what could be bid fast. Developers copied what could be repeated. Trade training centered the machine, not the shell. An entire field of knowledge disappeared from architecture schools, building practice, and ordinary remodeling conversation. Not because it failed, because it was not profitable. And yes, the same pattern continues. Open Secrets shows that the Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute spent $964,622 on federal lobbying in 2022 alone. At the same time, the standards world kept tightening around equipment pathways, filtration pathways, and mechanical compliance pathways. Some of that work protects health. Fine, but it also protects a market. That market pays when you buy a box, replace a box, and call someone back to service it. The dollar figure is the punchline. The US HVAC systems market sits in the tens of billions of dollars every year. Every passive alternative installed is a compressor, a refrigerant charge, and a service agreement that never gets sold. Now, if you already own a house and you're thinking this only applies to people with land, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. You don't need to buy equipment. You need a yard, a drill, and a weekend. If I were building the simplest version at an existing house, I would start with one intake run and one small fan. I would mark a trench 32 to 40 feet long and 6 feet deep. I would keep it at least 18 inches away from the foundation. Then I would hold a steady 2% fall toward a gravel sump so condensation never sits still. That step matters. For the tube, I would use 6-inch smooth wall HDPE or 6-inch schedule 40 PVC. I would never use corrugated drain tile. Smooth wall matters because moisture has nowhere to hide and dust has fewer places to stick. I would bed the pipe in 3/4 inch washed gravel. In wet soil, I would wrap the trench in geotextile fabric. Then I would seal every joint with solvent weld or gasketed fittings. Radon loves bad joints. At the intake, I would mount a screened hood 24 inches above grade and face it north or east when possible. Inside that hood, I would add a MERV8 filter box and a metal insect screen. At the house end, I would bring the line through a rim joist or crawl space plenum. Then I would connect a 38 to 45 watt inline duct fan and a backdraft damper. If I wanted less fan noise, I would add 8 feet of insulated flex duct after the fan. The costs stay low if you stay disciplined. 40 feet of used or discounted pipe can run $7 to $14 per foot. A solid inline fan runs $69 to $118. The hood, screen, filter box, damper, gravel, primer, and cement can fit between $86 and $143. If the trenching is already handled, the whole system stays under $500. If you dig by hand, the price rises in sweat, not cash. One Saturday morning for layout. One long weekend for the install. One warning: smooth wall pipe and drainage slope are not optional. Corrugated pipe causes standing condensation, biofilm, and the exact mold problem critics love to mention. And here is the part most people miss. This run does not have to replace your entire system on day one. It only has to knock down the starting temperature. On a 95-degree day, keep the house shaded and reasonably tight. A single buried run like this can deliver air in the mid-70s within about 5 minutes. That is enough to change the room. It cuts compressor runtime. It makes the rest of the house easier to control. You can also tune it. Add a simple bypass damper for shoulder seasons. Add a 4-inch cleanout near the intake so you can inspect the pipe with a scope. Add a second parallel run later if your soil stays dry and your yard allows it. Pair it with attic venting, exterior shade, and a night flush. Then the effect stacks. First, the intake air drops. Then the interior heat load drops. Then the machine you already own works less. That is how you win. The first run teaches you the principle. The second run teaches you confidence. After that, you stop thinking like a customer. You start thinking like a builder again. And use common sense about site limits. If your water table is high or your yard floods after every storm, stop and solve drainage first. If tree roots already own the trench path, move the run 3 feet farther out. If your basement stays above 60% relative humidity all summer, dehumidify that space before you dump more cool air into it. This system rewards dry soil, sealed joints, and patient layout. It punishes shortcuts. Maintenance is plain. Change the intake filter once a season. Check the hood after storms. Flush and inspect the line once a year. If the system is sealed well and drained well, it asks for very little. No refrigerant recharge, no capacitor hunt in July, no emergency appointment when everyone else in town is also desperate. Your conventional central air system costs $6,800 to $14,600 to install. It costs $89 to $214 per month to run in hard summer. It lasts 12 to 17 years before it ends up in a landfill. This costs under $500 total. It lasts 25 to 40 years. Your choice. Everything I've covered across this channel is now in one place. Root cellar cooling, lime wash walls, and rainwater laundry all sit there together, step by step, season by season, room by room, in the order the families actually use it. Link is in the description, but stay here. Because what Eli showed me in that cool stone room is the part nobody is talking about yet. What struck me most was not the temperature. It was the silence. No hum outside the bedroom, no rush of panic when the utility bill lands, no dependence on a supply chain you cannot see. The Amish did not read this in a textbook. They figured it out the way all real knowledge gets discovered, by paying attention to what the earth was already doing. Once you feel that difference, you cannot unlearn it. A shaded intake, a buried run, a stable sink below your feet. That is not primitive. That is disciplined. Modern cooling trained you to rent relief one billing cycle at a time. This asks a harder question. What if the house can help? What if the ground under your yard has been offering the same answer all along? If you're the kind of person who believes real knowledge was quietly pushed aside, you already know what to do. It happened to protect someone else's profit. Hit subscribe. Not for me. For what comes next. Because this is not a channel. This is a quiet movement of people who have decided they're done being sold what they already own. I want to hear from you. Drop your state, your July power bill, or the old cooling trick your grandparents used in the comments. I read every single one, and your answers decide what we cover next. Next week, I'm going to show you what a 1925 Penn State dairy house document reveals. It keeps food, milk, and one back room cool with lime, shade, and moving water. And the paper trail proves institutions knew these low-energy methods decades before selling you the mechanical substitute. You're not going to want to miss that one.